All right, students, hello, I, Mr. Arsola, again with a review, our last review for our last unit, our last test, which will be taken tomorrow for Unit 10, Australia, New Zealand, and Oceania. This review video is going to go ahead and focus on the settlement patterns and culture of the region or in the unit. Okay, so first off, settlement patterns. Okay, so a settlement pattern, if you didn't already know, basically just means the way that people settle in a region, the way that people sort of set up their living quarters. Now, when it comes to Australia, its cities or its urban centers are mostly located along the coastline, as we can see here in the top picture, the map of Australia. All along the eastern coastline here tends to be a lot of the bigger cities, such as Sydney, the capital of Canberra, Newcastle, Brisbane, Gladstone, Mackay, Townsville, and Cairns. Whereas the western part of Australia and more so inland, there's not really a whole lot of cities around there. Okay, like you still have a few, but not nearly as many as what we see here on the East Coast near the waterline. Now, why do we think that is? Also kind of a running theme here that we've had all throughout all units in sixth grade social studies, world cultures. Why do people mainly want to live near water, like along coastlines? So just give that a little second for thought. And honestly, the answer for that is a variety of reasons. We can probably just focus on maybe three. The first and most obvious one is that water is necessary for survival, not just for humans, but for pretty much any living things or all living things. We need water to survive. So obviously, the closer you are to water, the more likely you are to actually survive, or at least the easier time you have of doing it. The second thing, maybe not so obvious, is that water tends to mediate or sort of level out the temperatures of an area. So think of the opposite of a very wet, like coastline area. So like a desert where it's extremely dry, it tends to be whenever it's hot in desert, it's extremely hot. And whenever, like maybe during the nighttime when it gets a lot cooler, it's extremely cold in those dry desert areas because there's not a whole lot of water to help mediate or average out the temperature. Whereas along the coastlines here, summers and winters tend to be not nearly as hot. I mean, not saying they're not, still hot or cold, but they're not nearly as hot and they're not nearly as cold when you have that presence of water to help, kind of balance out and make the temperatures more temperate. And then the third thing is like resources. Okay, so think like animal resources like fish and fishing, trade, being able to actually, have like shipping routes along water. Very hard to have shipping routes whenever you're like in the very middle part of a country, there's no water or no rivers and lakes around. So just three of the many, many reasons why people would want to live near water, like along coastlines. And Australia is no different. And the next thing is Australia's outback. So kind of very similar to what we read in our textbook in one of the lessons last week with the bush, kind of like one of our Australia vocab words. The outback is this mostly uninhabited part of Australia where, again, it's not really populated. There's very few towns, very few cities. So looking here at the bottom map, it actually shows us kind of the spread of this outback of Australia, this very sparsely populated, kind of uninhabited, underdeveloped part or undeveloped part of Australia. And kind of like contrasting it with the top one or the top map here, you can see that these cities in the west and the middle part actually are along the outback. But why are there so few cities, you think? Why are there not a whole lot of people or towns being made here? So just kind of think of that why there, that why question for a second. Why is that? And the big answer to that, kind of going back to what was said about deserts in the first part, is that the outback really honestly is just a massive like desert. I don't want to say wasteland, but it's very dry. Okay, so there's still plants, there's still trees there, but for the most part, it is going to be a very dry area where there's just not a whole lot of like livable land, at least not land you can really live in for extended periods of time, like along the coastline. That's honestly the big reason why there's just not really as many cities as we see here along the coastline of Eastern Australia. Now, kind of a vocab word here, proximity. just means closeness, and we're going to see that in our test. The closeness to beaches with a lot of these Australian cities actually encourages this culture, this wanting to be outside and go outside and do things, like outdoor activities. That's called outdoorsmanship. And a lot of that is owed to the fact that if you're near water, you're near a beach, especially if it's very warm and temperate, you really want to go out and just do things, right? You don't really want to just be cramped up in your room. If you have the opportunity to actually go out and enjoy like boating or fishing or going out and flying a kite out on the beach with the nice temperate coast air and weather, people are for the most part, I'm not saying everyone's, into that, but for the most part, people are going to constantly want to do that if they're living near the coastline. Okay. There's water, there's scenic areas. People just want to go out and actually, do outdoorsy things. And that's where we get a lot of like people that are very nature oriented in Australia. They're very wanting to know more about nature and get close to animals. So think like the National Geographic or the Discovery Channel, Australian like hosts that tend to be there with their TV shows. So think like maybe the Crocodile Hunter. I was going to say Charles Darwin, but James Irwin. So people like that and that culture is just a big part of Australia, where people, because they're near these coastlines, near these beaches, they're just going to want to go out and actually do outdoor things with those beaches. Okay. All right, so moving away from settlement patterns, these pictures are kind of like wrapping up what was talked about in the previous slide. The left side is going to be the Australian outback. So again, the very sparsely very less populated part of Australia, more so in the western inland part over here on the left. And this is a very famous rock in Australia known as Uluru, or previously known as Ayers Rock. And on the other side, so mostly in eastern Australia, is going to be these urban centers like Sydney pictured here with its very iconic opera house. A whole lot more cities and urban areas along the eastern coastline of Australia, because again, it's not part of the outback. It's not in that dry region of Australia. Okay, and then last but not least, final slide talking about culture, mostly in Australia and New Zealand. So recall that New Zealand and Australia had original people there, so indigenous people. In Australia, they were known as the Aboriginal people. At least that's what most Westerners refer to them as. And then New Zealand, over to the east of Australia, the indigenous people were known as, or still are known as, the Maori. Now, around the time of the 1700s and 1800s, though, British colonists, kind of kickstarted off by the quote unquote, the discoveries or the travelings of Captain Cook from Britain. After he discovered, again, quote unquote, he went to those areas of New Zealand and Australia, he sort of cued in like, hey, there's, land here that maybe British people want to come and, join in on. And with that, these British colonists that eventually came over to Australia and New Zealand, they introduced the English language. Okay, so remember that the Maori and the Aboriginal people of New Zealand and Australia, respectively, they didn't speak English at first. They didn't just have English originally, not until the British colonists started coming in and basically sort of integrating to their own culture and essentially teaching them that English, or giving them the opportunity to learn English. And English is, at least to my knowledge, the most or primarily spoken in New Zealand and Australia even today. Now, getting into focusing on New Zealand specifically, the Aboriginal or the original people of New Zealand, the Maori, their traditions and culture still have a very strong influence on New Zealand, even in modern times. So 3 of those key traditions here, one of them we can actually see in the pictures here, the haka, which is known as the war dance that is used to show strength and intimidate the Maori's opponents whenever they, had warfare. So up here at the top is going to be a more traditional sort of look, or the more traditional dress of the Maori's haka. And I'm assuming that the people in the photo here are actual part of the Maori culture, like they're actually ingrained in it, like their ancestors are probably the original Maori people. And it's very, if you ever see like YouTube videos of the haka dance, it's actually it's kind of a scary thing. It's a war dance, so it wasn't really a sort of oh, look how cool these dance moves are. No, it was meant to intimidate and show strength and basically scare the bejeebies out of whoever it is they were going against. Okay, so they do these like very aggressive, violent arm and leg movements, slapping of the thighs. They, as you can see the picture here, they're like opening up their mouths, they're making their eyes like these horrifically scary faces to really intimidate and scare whoever it is they were, going against in the war or in the fight. And kind of the more modern interpretation of that, as we can see here at the bottom, is the rugby team of New Zealand, rugby being kind of like very similar to football, but it's actually more like a combination of football and soccer. So this is the New Zealand rugby team. I believe they're called the All Blacks, and they've actually integrated this very popular Maori tradition and custom into the New Zealand national rugby team with this haka dance. Okay, so you can actually look up, it's actually a very famous video on YouTube. You can look up like All Blacks rugby team haka dance, and you see them just like doing their haka dance in front of like the opposing rugby team they're going against, and the other team's just like, what the heck's going on? It's really good stuff if you ever feel the need to look that up. So the second thing here for the Maori tradition is the hongi. I think I'm saying that right, the hongi or hanji, which is basically like a greeting where they press their noses and their foreheads together and seen as a symbol of like respect and, like you're really acknowledging the other person whenever you greet them. Okay, not just like a simple hello or not just a simple handshake. They're really like pushing their faces together. It's just part of that culture. And last but not least, the tamoko. And we actually, I can see some of that up here, which are like the traditional tattoos that tend to be put onto the Maori people as just part of their tradition and culture. And a lot of the tamoko tattoos tend to be focused more so around like the face and the neck area, because at least in my research into it, the Maori actually believe the face or the face area of the body to be very important and spiritual. So putting the tattoos there is sort of like a way of, I guess, like sort of honoring that aspect or acknowledging that very important aspect of the human body. Okay, so that's going to go ahead and wrap up this review video. I hope you all learned something, especially considering that we have our test tomorrow, and you kind of need to learn this stuff, especially the underlined blue areas here in the video and the PowerPoint. You'll be prepared for the questions that pertain to the culture and settlement patterns of New Zealand and Australia in tomorrow's test. All right, well, take care. And if this is the last video that you see my face in this year, I hope you all have a great and awesome summer, and good luck on your test and the rest of your assignments. All right, take care and bye-bye.